But we will see how that goes. But don't worry, this isn't a talk about Unity ads. It's not a talk about... Oh, for sound. I have some wire for sound. It's not a talk about Unity ads. It's not a talk about Everyplay specifically. It's actually a talk about ethics. I know you thought you were coming to a games conference, but I'm actually going to try and talk to you about ethics. Okay, let me start with this. Who's a big gamer on tablet and mobile? Big gamer, come on. Oh, come on, there's going to be... I bet you are secretly. I bet you play a Candy Crush, something on the line. I bet you do. Come on, national pride and all that. Now, who's a fan of free-to-play? Do you know what? I'm surprised. That's good. That's good. Now, who's heard the argument, Candy Crush is evil? Because yeah, so you know what I'm talking about. So there's been quite a lot of talk about the free-to-play evolution. So what's happened, I've been a big advocate for free-to-play for a long time. In fact, my job at Unity is as an evangelist for Unity ads and Everyplay, yeah, but my remit is also about understanding problems facing developers. So I've been really interested in free-to-play and what happens with it, and in particular, more recently when we see people starting to question it. Now, obviously, at first people said, no, it's a bad idea. Now they say it's damaging games, and now it's saying it's addictive. Well, I thought it'd be a good idea to actually look at some of the psychology. So this is not just a not technical talk. This is also one about psychology. I bet you didn't expect that. You're going to look at what happens to players, because we often forget games are about players. So let's talk about that. So the thing I want to try and just sort of briefly is just give you a sense of what Everyplay is. If this works, he says. Sometimes it doesn't work with the HDMI, but that's apparently a known bug in... Yeah, it's a known bug in PowerPoint. This is not supposed to be a salesy pitch. Let's come back to that later. So we're going to talk about Everyplay at some point, but it's basically a gameplay recording SDK that we have, which means that you can make your players record what they do as they do it. You don't have to remember to turn on the recording. It just works, and you get to share, and you get these crazy people telling you about how great their experiences are playing the game, which is brilliant. It's basically what we love. We love sharing our experiences with games. I'll talk to you a little bit about ads and something like that later, but not very much. First, I want to just declare something. I am not a psychologist. However, I do have a very good friend of mine called Bernie Good, who is, and we are co-writing a book that's going to be called The Psychology of Game Design. So we're really interested in this area. Now, I think that it's important to understand what games are. Games are things which create engagement through the autonomy, the agency that I have. There's something, I do something to this. The difference between reading a book and a game is that it's not that this character did this, it's I did this. There is no show and tell. Because we can feel competent at what we do. So what does that have to do with this kind of game design thing? Well, as we've been moving on, we've started to see people, as I said earlier, starting to question the whole kind of premise of what games are. When you see something like Clash of Clans or Candy Crush, in fact, actually not those games, but the games that have followed, the games that have copied them, there's this question about what habit-forming design does to us. Yeah, who's played Fallout Shelter lately? Really? Am I the only one? Oh, we have to compare shelters. I have 150 people in my shelter. What's that, sir?
No one has an iPhone.
No one has an iPhone. Well, that's true. I'm an Android phone user and an iPad user, so in my defense. See, not the only one there. See, brotherhood of the Fallouts. Anyway, so the point of all that is that there are these games which make us want to go back to them time again. In fact, the argument is that they use a technique called the Skinner box. Anyone heard of Skinner box? Okay, so Skinner box is actually fairly old. I mean, it's a 50s, 60s era psychology experiment by a guy called I always forget if it's BJ or BF Skinner. I think it's BF Skinner. The reason I get confused is because the second psychologist I'm going to talk about has B in his initials as well. So BF Skinner talked about what happens to rats in this little cage, which wasn't originally called a Skinner box, but got given his name later. Now, imagine this box. It's got some seed in it. The animal presses the button, gets the seed. Fantastic. Turns out, if you make it more difficult for them to click the button, they'll keep pressing the button until they get the food. If you make that random or change the variable states, you start potentially conditioning their behavior. That's why it's called operant conditioning. And there's people who've been looking at games like these kind of standard repeating, harvesting and pattern matching games. Well, because they've got this simple mechanic and they give rewards, they must be Skinner boxes. Now, I'm not sure I agree, but let's take that premise on. The first thing I think we want to think about is, what are games anyway? Games are manipulation. We are already changing people's behavior and supplying them a reward for doing so, aren't we? I mean, think about it, right? How many games have you gone, it's a first-person shooter, you're going down a corridor, you find yourself turning left. You're not really sure why you turned left, but you did turn left, and then later on you find out there was no right turn. Have you had that moment? That's magic. That's magic. They made me do that. Because we know why. Because as designers, we've made sure that the lighting's right. We've made sure that the audio's right. We've made sure that the reward is right. We can tell that there's monsters down there, so we're going to go shoot them or run away from the ones that are coming from the other way. You know, if it's like Alien Isolation, you want to get away from there, don't you? If it's like Doom, you want to get towards it. So we know about the sort of careful use, the unpeeling of the narrative that we do in games. That's what we do. We are, as designers, manipulators. But is that evil? No, because we're creating value. We're creating entertainment. So does it become evil when we start adding money? Is selling things in a game evil? Now, where I come from is, I spent 17 years in games. I was the global games lead at 3, the mobile operator, back in like 2003 when we launched. I did the kind of fundamental design of the whole platform there. In 2005, we were doing 68% of the UK downloads and plays, 45% of the revenue on 5% of the audience. So I'm Mr. Evil. In fact, I am genuinely Mr. Evil. I took 60% revenue share. And I still paid out more than any other operator. Now, I mean, okay, the reason I say all that is, so I kind of understand retail. The funny thing about free-to-play is the retailer isn't Apple. The retailer isn't Google. It's you. That's what's happened. That's the thing that a lot of people don't get. Inside games, we've changed what we do. We've changed just that we provide this entertainment and we let someone else who has nothing to do with game design decide how to make money out of it. Those evil people over there in the other room. And instead, we just focused on making the game, didn't we? Well, I think actually that's interesting. I'll give you an example. Is premium necessarily good? Anyone think premium is necessarily good? Pay up front good? Necessarily? I'm going to say name of a game and see how many people know what I mean. Duke Nukem Forever. Yeah? Anyone? Yeah? I think a few giggles, you know what I'm talking about. I think I spent £35, I think I spent on it. It only had to be bad. And I'd have been happy. Because I'm a fan. I'm happy to show my love for the brand. It was terrible. It was genuinely terrible. I mean, it was just so bad that I probably could have done it better. Yeah, that's not fair. Rubbish coder. I am learning Unity in my defense, and the last Unity training day, I actually knew what I was doing. I can't believe it. So I must be getting better, but you do not want to look through how many logic steps. Oh. Anyway, yes, for loops, no. So my point is, I follow a technical talk, and I have to talk about for loops. That's bad of me. Anyway, so money isn't necessarily the thing. The issue is, are we creating habit-forming behavior which is changing people's element of choice? Are we actually affecting what they think they're choosing? Who's played The Witcher 3? Yeah, Witcher 3. You have absolute free reign to do anything in the adventure, in the missions, don't you? Actually, you don't. There are loads of options, but there's only one that actually takes the story further. There might be I haven't finished it yet, so there might be a couple there that have a bit more free reign. There's a couple I noticed there. You could save the family or not save the family, but essentially, you're not really in control. You're simply peeling off the available layers, which come down to very small options that don't actually change the fundamental plot. But you feel like they do. I am the Witcher. I am killing all those hippogriffs and I can't even remember the names of the monsters. It's harpies and all that kind of stuff. I switched to Batman recently, so that's why it's out of my mind. Anyway, point being is that we manipulate all the time, and we create choices which feel like they're true, but they're not. Free-to-play is no different, but it's about money now. So is money the manipulation? Is money the thing that's making this emotional reaction amongst a lot of people? Now, obviously, the key question that's come out has been around children. Now, I'm not going to suggest that we should be targeting children audiences. There's some great legislation already in place. There's discussions going on in the EU about how to present things. I don't want to get into that because that's messy and there's all sorts of other things that go along with that. So I specifically only want to talk about people who are not vulnerable. So that means I'm not going to talk about kids or people who have issues, but normal everyday folks is the target audience here. Now, if we talk about normal everyday folks, how many times a day are you presented with somebody telling you should buy this now? 2 for 1. Buy one, get one free. You are being manipulated in every media, on every device, every day, multiple times a day. Do you do everything that they tell you to do? You will buy, sell it bang, and clean your bathroom today. Because the shouty man tells you to. Sorry, in the UK, the advertising for Sill It Bang is a... Anyway, I won't explain. Ask me later. The point... don't. The point is that we are actually really good at Skinner boxes as human beings. We are actually understand the process. Somebody offers us something, we can respond to it. Actually, that isn't a Skinner box. That's just somebody trying to present us with an offer, and we have to make a decision. So, I thought I'd ask the question, what is addiction? Addiction has a specific definition. I went for the Harvard Health website definition, if I can remember it off the top of my head. But it's basically a compulsion that overrides otherwise rational behaviour. So if I go and buy a lunchbox in Fallout Shelter, is that something that's a rational or irrational behaviour? And am I compelled to do it because it's so nice when I open it up that I have to basically stop feeding my child to do it? That's the level we're talking about here. I mean, that is the level that we would have to be doing if this is truly about addiction. If it's really, truly something which is evil, for want of a better phrase, we have to be demonstrating that non-vulnerable people are going to be so absorbed that we have the power, the magical power, to force them to do something against their own self-interest. I don't think that happens. There's lots of reasons why I don't think that happens, and I really hope we can have a good debate about this later on as well. But essentially, if it's about addiction, that's the bar. We shouldn't be using the term addiction about games. The trouble is we always used to. Look at that great game, it's so addictive, it's fantastic. Whereas now, look at that game, it's so addictive, it's evil. We have to decide what language you're using. And the trouble is we love games, we adore games, and we want to get into that sort of magical moment of our childhood where when we were playing, I'm trying to think, for me it was like probably something like, I'm old, I used to play Shades on my Apple IIe, online multiplayer games in 1985. That's how old I am. Anyway, so I used to love this kind of Quake, Counter-Strike. I get to claim this one. I saved Counter-Strike. It's a bit of a lie. They ran out of money before they got bought. I bought them some new computers, and 3 of our team got their names in the credits. Fantastic. That last bit, I was only told 10 years later, because they only could put 3 names on, and they didn't want to not get their names on it. I'm gonna have my name in Counter-Strike. No, anyway, the point of all this, anyway, is we're passionate and adore games. But there's a difference when we use the language of psychology compared to the language of design. A lot of the words we use, particularly in monetization, like whale. Anyone like the term whale? You like the term whale? Oh, Sorry, I fooled you there. You've heard the term whale. See, that's what you do as a speaker. You try and get people to think of a pattern of behaviour, and then you fool them. Oh wait, that's a designer. But you're right. You've heard of the term whale. The whale comes from gambling, as you know. Is it a complimentary term? Would you say? No. I mean, many people have described me as a whale. That was just me getting out of the swimming pool. Come on, it was better than that, surely. Anyway, so it's not a complimentary term, and not least because we're in an industry where, and casual, well, not necessarily casual, depends on your definition. I don't think casual is a good definition, but on games which are focused around audiences which happen to be primarily female and slightly older, calling them whales, is not a very good term, but it's also not a good definition. Whales are not people, they're not things, they're not... You don't suddenly, miraculously, spontaneously create a whale. Look, there you go, there's a whale, have him. Whales are part of, or the term whale actually refers to a part of an engagement life cycle. We find the game, we discover it. We decide whether it fits into our lifestyle or not. We learn about it. We then become engaged, and over time we may become super engaged, and that's what we mean by when we say whale. But this use of this language is actually problematic, because the language is what's the problem, because we start alienating people. Well, that, and when we start seeing patterns of repeat behaviour designed specifically to keep me playing simply to get money out of my pocket. And I don't think games like Candy Crush or Clash of Clans are guilty of that at all. I think that there are some games out there, though, that are trying to copy the outcome of those games, the way they're designed, because they've seen them being commercial. And I think as players, we don't give them enough credit. I think they smell, there's something not quite right if your only objective is to make money. It's kind of a question that we need to think about in terms of our engagement with the player. We have to think about the behavioural process of how they play. Because if you think about it, what do games do? They create a state of flow. Flow is something which is really fascinating. It's almost like a meditative state when we get into that kind of... We all know flow. Anyone not know flow? Anyone not know? Okay, good. So flow is that meditative state when we're not bored and we're not... it's not too difficult. So it's great. It's fantastic. It's almost a suggestible state, arguably. And at the same time, we're providing them with reinforcement in behaviour. Do this. This is the right thing to do. Do this. It's the right thing to do. Is that brainwashing? That's kind of like what the cults talk about in that way. Because the trouble is, that's not what it is at all. And the one thing I think really saves it, and this is where I'm stepping away slightly from the literature and giving a personal interpretation, is it's something that sort of Johan Hutchison talked about in his definition of games called Homo Ludus. And he talked about games being outside our normal lives. That's really a fascinating thing. In fact, it's the third part. So we've talked about games as being about competence. We've talked about games about being about self-belief. But actually, the third part is, autonomy. And the third part is that games are escape. If games were about the real world, I could see how that manipulation could happen, but we separate ourselves. We suspend disbelief when we enter a gaming world. And to think that we can actually, sustain the behavioural patterns over a long period of time, that's over-guessing how far we can go with games. There's actually much more powerful techniques out there to control people's behaviour control's the wrong word, to engage people. Joy, fun, value, entertainment. That's the stuff that makes games games. If we focus on the games, they're the things that are going to keep people playing. We focus on the enjoyment, the play, the delight. And the reason is we don't control the external stimulus. We don't control everything that happens to players. We're not dealing with food. This is not rats whose only source of food is to press the right button at the right time. We're not putting their life patterns at risk by withholding their gameplay. What we're doing instead is providing them with escape. We're providing them opportunities. But that's not to say that we shouldn't be careful. There's some really interesting evidence that shows that we need to show disengagement. We need to give people the opportunity to not get so completely overwhelmed in the moment. The emotional heat then can make them, you can encourage people to make emotional decisions rather than logical decisions. And when you do that, you actually start breaking down the relationship with the player in the long term. When we see people manipulating people, that's obviously bad. But more to the point, even if we simply engage people without a break, we don't just damage their long-term engagement, we actually damage the likelihood of them coming back to play next time. Think about mobile phones. If you had a game that takes maybe a minute and a half to play a round of play versus one that takes 15 minutes on your mobile phone, which one are you going to pick up most often? How often do you know you've got 15 minutes to play it? Very rarely. So you choose the one that's got the right frame of play, the right rate and rhythm and pattern. And actually it's in our best interest to provide games that allow you to disengage. It's only through that disengagement we have truly good fans, because we can see, here's an enjoyable thing and I don't burn out. That's good game design. And so is being upfront, transparency. It builds trust. It builds the propensity for somebody to say, hey, I saw this game, it was worthwhile. Why don't you play it too? I saw this game, it was worthwhile. I just spent £15 and I loved it. I'd much rather be in a situation when our players love what we said rather than the other way around. The games industry is in a fantastic position where we've gone for the first time truly mass market. We've seen a phenomenal shift because of that towards free to play. Not only is there an infinite amount of supply of games, but we also have a much larger audience than ever foreseen in games. And that audience isn't willing to pay up front. That audience has to be delighted, has to be shown what's possible. But as designers, we have to be sensitive that we have to provide them with the opportunity to disengage, and we have to clearly communicate what we're offering. If we do those two things, we can avoid the accusations that we're Skinner boxes. We can avoid the creation of reactions against our game. And the reason that happens is because we're focusing on the fun. Here's a bunch of sources. The stuff I was saying is all based around a whole bunch of information that I have researched. It is research, not just me talking. If you want to get a copy of this, I think I'm going to share it with the people. And obviously, if you're sorry, I have to give special thanks, or is it apologies, to my friend Bernie Good, who's a cyber psychologist even. And like I say, we're about to embark on writing a new book on the psychology of game design. I hope that's interesting. I'm happy to answer questions on anything about games, apart from technical or pricing. I don't talk licenses.